Hey everyone, my name is Joshua. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, well, I'm sorry in advance because it's gonna be a very low quality video, and there's not much I can do about that. So strap in. This channel has really only been for school stuff so far, and it's still for school stuff. This video is for school, but I'm using this as an opportunity to talk about something pretty interesting that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. I just never haven't really gotten into the YouTube thing for that much. But no, today we're talking about a little something called representation. Many of you may be familiar with that word. If you're Latin, probably less so. A lot of Latin representation in US media is lackluster at best, until the last couple years or so. So we're going to be touching on why that is. And if that's interesting to you, stick around. If you're a Latino living most of your life in the US, you're probably more than a little familiar with what I'm talking about. If you guys have ever seen a movie with someone with a Latin last name, like a Rodriguez or a Perez, and the only thing they talk about is, saying a bunch of cuss words and talking about their mom's famous arroz con pollo recipe or something like that. And they never bring it up again. And that's like generally the tier 1 level representation that a lot of people are familiar with. Just coming from my experience as somebody that is mixed with my mom's side being Puerto Rican. Maybe a lot of Puerto Rican people specifically can identify with this. But when you're in the US and you see a lot of things that are having to do with Latin people, generally it's about like Mexican people specifically, which kind of negates everybody else that exists south of the United States. So when you're looking for things that represent you outside of music and you're not really gonna find a whole lot, unfortunately. And I'm gonna talk about a couple examples today that really touch on the 3 subcategories of representation that you see most of the time. And we're gonna use a handy list to do that. So here is our list: characters and not caricatures. Here's our 3 criteria for measuring it. Does this family interact with another non-family Latin character? How much Spanish is spoken by this character in the form of media that they're in? And is being Latin important to their story? I think these are really important measurements. And I know I kind of made these up for myself, but they are important, and I'm gonna go over why. First one being, does this character interact with another non-family Latin character? A myriad of media that has a Latin character depicted and wants to speak on Latin culture tends to do that through the form of their family, like their aunts, their grandparents, their mom or dad, and have that be like the sort of cultural exposition of their character. And that's kind of limiting. It's not really indicative of a lot of people's experience. And I wanted to include non-family specifically because having a Latin character interact with another Latin person in real life is kind of an indicator of how much representation is being paid attention to in a movie. If you have to have, abuela in the flowery dress making arroz con pollo to tell the audience that your character is Latin, then you're doing a little too much. It's a little too heavy-handed. So we're gonna incorporate that into our list as a measurement. Second one is how much Spanish is spoken. A really important one, in my opinion, because how many characters are out there that will have, 3 words of Spanish they speak. 2 of them are curse words, and the other one is like bienvenido, or a phrase like buenos dias, and then they'll never bring it up again. Because there's a lot of people that speak some form of Spanish, whether it's, fully, or whether it's a little bit broken, with their family. And that really changes their cultural identity. It kind of it kind of signals a lot more than just how much they swear, like who this person is. And for a piece of media to do that, competently is an important measure for what we're talking about today. The third one is being Latin important to their story. I added this after a lot of deliberation because I wanted to find a way to word this sentence in a way that made sense. And I think it does. I think that having a Latin character, if you're gonna do that, if it's even gonna be considered diversity, then you have to find a way to tie it in with their character. Is it brought up as anything integral to the story? Is it important to the narrative or to this character's arc in your story that they are Latin? Maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, well, it's not really that important that you have to shoehorn in Latin culture into like every character's origin or every character's, development in a story. And I agree with you. You shouldn't have to heavy-handedly make it their entire life for every Latin character in all forms of media. However, a lot of stories do the other extreme, which is to diminish their Latinness to the point that it doesn't matter at all, other than to, I guess, have the image of diversity. Like, technically you have a Latin character, but no one ever treats him like a Latin character or acknowledges what he is or acknowledges how his culture has affected his outlook. And I think that's really missing out on a big part of the Latin experience. So let's talk about our first example today. Well, our first two examples, because they're kind of in the same category, and that category being our tier 1 representation. And I am, of course, talking about the infamous Luis Serra from Resident Evil 4. They had a remake come out recently, so it's been a lot more popular. And Jackie Wells from Cyberpunk 2077. It is important to note a little bit about what their character is in that story, because I think it applies to a lot of different forms of media. Jackie Wells doesn't have a Latin last name. The only real way that you know from his character in the story that he is Latin is the aforementioned swear words. Bullet point 2. As he, when you're in combat with Jackie Wells, he will often, burst out with different swear words, Spanish swear words that he wants to use. And that's the only way you would know that he's a Latin character. And this is kind of our baseline for representation. You have a co-lead with your lead that is Latin, that is outwardly Latin, is identifiably Latin. But the only features that are emphasized as to what that means is appearance and cuss words. And our second one is Luis Serra. And Luis is part of a game called Resident Evil 4, which takes place in Spain, in a Spanish-speaking country. But this older version is undoubtedly a cartoon. The suave, kind of like swashbuckling, kind of womanizing Latin person that kind of fits the archetype that a lot of people think about when they think of like a Latin person. And he speaks very, very, very little Spanish in the story. His whole role is kind of secondary to the whole thing. And those are kind of our two base tier representations in video game media. But we're going to move on to our second one. Our second one is going to be from a little film called Ant-Man. And in Ant-Man, we have our co-lead, Michael Pena, who's playing a character called Luis, who is every bit a cartoonish Latin person. There's like 3 comedic reliefs, and all of them are different cultural backgrounds, and it's a whole thing. But this specific character has a thing that he does, that he tells stories about how he learned like bits of information. And in those stories, a lot of times you'll see kind of him like doing flashbacks It's him talking to his friends, talking to his family. They're all in like, I guess, traditional like California, West Coast, like Mexican style, where kind of like the Cholo-esque archetype. And he's kind of like a fast-talking, like quipping, funny Latin character that the main character is best friends with. So does this character interact with another non-family Latin character? Yes. In a flashback, yeah, he does. Even though technically he's talking to himself, he technically does talk to another Latin character. They're not all family, some of them are friends. So he does pass that. How much Spanish is spoken? I want to say almost none. There might be a word thrown in every once in a while, but it's to the point that you don't even like realize it or remember it. So we're gonna go ahead and go with a fat 0 on that. Is being Latin important to their story? I think it's important to the story in a way that they needed info for a thing, and him having Latin people as connections, like, kind of got the info through that. But it's not really important to his story. His story being the best friend from prison that supports the main character and becoming Ant-Man. I don't know what arc he was ever given, but being Latin is certainly not a part of it. And that's consistent through every movie he's in. It's gonna be a 1 out of 3 for this list for Michael Peña's character. Again, it's a comedy. You have to give it a little more grace for that, but it is like one of the most mainstream like Latin characters in Marvel, one of the most mainstream movie franchises ever. And our answer to that was this, our tier 3 Latin representation. And I know it's really easy to think about Mike Miles Morales as like the savior of Latin representation in the United States. So I'm not gonna say that this is like the end all be all, but it's a step in the right direction. It's more than 0. It's more than making funny quips and saying funny Spanish cuss words. So let's measure up to the list. First one. Does this character interact with another non-family Latin character? Yes, he does twice, I believe, across 2 movies. Most of what he interacts with as far as like the Latin aspect of it is gonna be family, his mom specifically. Even though I like how their interaction is really, it's a really good one, but we're gonna go ahead and cut that out because a lot of, again, speaking with family doesn't necessarily inform a lot of their identity as a person. But he does interact with 2 non-family characters. The first one being a barely seen friend on the street as he's walking by, and they greet him in Spanish, and he's like "Seguro que sí," and keeps on walking. And there's a little bit of a Anuel song, a famous rapper in the background singing a song. So that's a little bit of Latin representation snuck in there. The rest of it's in English, but he does have that little bit. The other one is in the second one where he's talking to the main Spider-Man, and they have a short interaction, but none of it's really like specifically focused on being Latin. It's mostly like on the story itself. So technically he does, but not really in a substantive way. How much Spanish is spoken? We covered this a little bit. Not a lot. I'd say out of 10, maybe a 1 or a 2, because he speaks a little bit with his mom, mostly like he responds to her in English, or like a very short like Spanish phrase, and she'll be speaking to him like a couple sentences in Spanish. And like that's cool. It's cool. It's more representative of like Puerto Rican experiences where it's like a little bit of both, but it's not like a substantial amount. He's never really been like tested or given the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody. And again, it's a primarily English movie, but it would have been fun. And I think it would have been a lot more representative. And is being Latin important to their story? This is a difficult one with Miles Morales. I think for him, controversial or not, I'm gonna say no, because his arc does not revolve or is not impacted by his Latinness. It's not. If you replaced his mom with another character of another ethnicity or another race, it would not have changed his story at all, because his story is mostly focused on family, but not like the Latinness of that family. So I would say it's gonna be no. But 2 out of 3 is not bad. And even if it wasn't a whole lot in the 2 section, still pretty good. I think going forward, if they're gonna have another main character that is Latin, that wants to identify as Latin, they need to be cognizant of how they're depicting him, and maybe incorporate more of what makes more of the Latin experience as part of his character motivation, especially like as a kid growing up. Like that impacts how he reacts to the world, and if it's not addressed in the movie, then there's a good chance it's never going to be really taken into account. But that's just my opinion, everybody. This is just me ranting for God knows how long. Thank you all for watching, and if you like what you see and you want more things of this nature, leave a comment, leave a like, and we'll go from there. But y'all have a good day.